Right now, someone is in charge of you. Maybe it's a manager. Maybe it's a CEO 3 floors up, whose name you barely know. Maybe it's a president, a governor, a landlord, a professor. You have spent your entire life inside structures of authority so deep and so total that you probably never stopped to ask the one question that should have been obvious from the beginning. Who was in charge before any of that existed? Not centuries ago. Not in ancient Rome or medieval Europe. Go further back. Way further. To the world your brain was actually built for. 100,000 years ago. 200,000. A small group of people, maybe 30, maybe 50, moving across a landscape with no roads, no cities, no governments, no laws written down anywhere. They hunted. They gathered. They slept under the sky or in shallow caves. And every single morning, someone had to decide where the group was going that day. There was no office. There was no title. There was no one wearing a crown or carrying a badge. And somehow, the group moved. Decisions got made. Meat got divided. Conflicts got resolved. Children got raised. The group survived. For 95% of the time that humans have existed on this planet, that was the whole system. No presidents, no managers, no kings, nothing. And we didn't fall apart. We didn't descend into chaos. We actually thrived. We spread from Africa across every continent on Earth, through ice ages and droughts and conditions that should have destroyed us 100 times over. Which raises a question that should genuinely unsettle you. If hierarchy is so natural, so inevitable, so obviously the correct way to organize human beings, why did we spend the overwhelming majority of our existence without it? Anthropologists have spent decades living with the last remaining hunter-gatherer groups on Earth. The Hadza in Tanzania, the San Bushmen of the Kalahari, the Batak in Malaysia, groups that still live something close to the life your ancestors lived for hundreds of thousands of years. And what they found inside those groups broke almost every assumption we carry about human nature. There were no leaders, not in any sense you would recognize, but there was something else, something older, stranger, and far more sophisticated than any org chart ever designed, and the system those people used to run their lives is still running inside you right now. Whether you know it or not, they didn't have a leader, but they had something that worked better than any leader ever could. And if you had stepped out of line inside one of those groups, you would have felt it immediately. Not from one person, from everyone. Anthropologists who study modern hunter-gatherer societies keep finding the same pattern across cultures that have never had contact with each other. The Hadza in Tanzania, the Kung in Botswana, the H in Paraguay. Groups separated by oceans and thousands of years of independent history, and inside every single one of them, the same invisible system is running. Researchers gave it a name. They call it reverse dominance hierarchy, which is a technical way of saying something surprisingly simple. In these groups, the community controls the individual, not the other way around. Here is how it works in practice. A hunter comes back to camp. He has been gone since before dawn. He tracked a kudu for 6 hours across difficult terrain, made a clean kill, and dragged 200 pounds of meat back through the bush. It is the biggest kill anyone has made in weeks. And when he walks into camp, he does not say a word about it. If someone asks, he shrugs. He says the animal was old and thin. He says he got lucky. He says it is probably not as much meat as it looks. This is not false modesty. This is the rule. To speak well of your own kill is a serious social violation. The other hunters will publicly mock him. They will call the meat stringy and worthless. They will laugh at the idea that he thinks this is impressive. The Kung even have a name for this ritual. They call it insulting the meat, and it serves a precise function. It makes sure that no single successful hunt can become the foundation of personal power. Christopher Boehm, an anthropologist at the University of Southern California, spent decades compiling data from 48 hunter-gatherer cultures around the world. What he found was consistent enough to be called a law. In every one of those societies, the group had developed specific deliberate mechanisms to prevent any individual from rising above the rest: mockery, gossip, shaming, refusal to cooperate, and in extreme cases, something far more final. If someone kept pushing, if someone kept taking more than their share, kept trying to give orders, kept acting like they were owed something the others were not. The group made a collective decision, and that person disappeared from the historical record entirely. There was no leader, but there was absolute accountability. And the difference between those two things is something most modern institutions have never figured out. There were no leaders, But there were people everyone listened to, and the moment you understand why, you will never look at a meeting room the same way again. Inside every hunter-gatherer group ever studied, certain individuals carried more weight than others. Their opinions shifted decisions. When they spoke, people went quiet. When they moved toward a direction, others followed. They had something that functioned exactly like authority, but it came from a completely different place than anything we would recognize today. It was never given. It was never inherited. It could never be taken. It could only be earned, and it could be lost the same afternoon it was earned, if you stopped deserving it. The things that created influence in those groups were narrow and specific. Knowledge was the first one. Not general intelligence, not confidence, not the ability to dominate a conversation. Specific, testable, life or death knowledge. The person who knew where water collected after a dry season in a particular stretch of land carried enormous weight because that knowledge kept 30 people alive. The person who could read weather patterns, who understood which plants were safe in which season, who remembered where game moved during specific months, that person mattered in a way that had nothing to do with personality or ambition. Generosity was the second one, not occasional generosity, consistent, almost compulsive generosity. The individuals with the most influence in hunter-gatherer societies were almost always the ones who gave the most away. Meat, resources, time, help. The accumulation of social debt turned out to be the only form of wealth that actually translated into power. You could not hoard your way to authority. You had to give your way there. Age was the third, but not age alone. Age combined with demonstrated survival. An elder who had lived through a drought, through a disease outbreak, through a period when the game disappeared for 2 seasons and the group nearly starved, that person carried a memory the group could not afford to lose. Their age was not respected because of tradition. It was respected because it was a library. Now here is the part that should stop you cold. Your brain was built inside that system, 200,000 years of it, and it still runs the same software. You have a finely tuned, almost unconscious detector for the difference between earned influence and manufactured authority. When someone in a meeting keeps interrupting, keeps steering every conversation back to themselves, keeps signaling status through dominance rather than through actual knowledge, something inside you registers it as wrong. Not rude, wrong, like a frequency that is slightly off. That feeling is not social anxiety. It is not insecurity. It is 200,000 years of your ancestors surviving by identifying exactly that pattern and treating it as a threat. The first people who tried to lead by force inside those groups did not last long. The group saw to that collectively, quietly, and permanently, which raises the only question left. If that system worked so well and ran so deep and kept us alive for so long, what finally broke it? About 10,000 years ago, someone stored enough grain to last through winter. That sentence sounds small. It is not small. It is arguably the most consequential thing that has ever happened to human social organization, and we are still living inside the consequences right now, today, in every office and classroom and government building on the planet. Here is what grain storage actually means. For the first time in 200,000 years of human history, a person could accumulate something that did not rot, did not run away, and did not have to be shared immediately to be useful. Every system the group had developed to prevent the rise of individual power, the mockery, the leveling, the collective enforcement of equality, all of it had evolved in a world where accumulation was physically impossible. You cannot hoard a mammoth. You cannot stockpile berries for 5 years. Resources moved through the group because resources had no choice but to move through the group. The moment that changed, everything changed with it. Archaeologists can pinpoint the shift with uncomfortable precision. At Çatalhöyük in modern Turkey, one of the earliest large human settlements on record, dating back roughly 9,000 years, the burials tell the story clearly. In the earliest layers of the site, the graves are almost identical. Same position, same depth, same absence of objects. Whoever these people were in life, in death they were equal. Then, a few layers up, something changes. Some graves begin to contain weapons, jewelry, objects that clearly took time and skill and resources to produce. Some bodies are buried with things, others are buried with nothing. The hierarchy that had been socially suppressed for 200,000 years had finally found a material foundation to stand on. And once it had that foundation, it did not let go. Within a few thousand years, the oldest human invention had produced the newest human problem. Kings, priests, armies, tax collectors. The entire architecture of domination that your ancestors spent the majority of their existence on Earth actively, collectively, and ruthlessly preventing. And here is what nobody tells you. Your brain never got the update. The mind you are using right now to read these words was shaped by 200,000 years of life without hierarchy, not 10,000 years of life inside it. Which means that on some level, you have always known that something about the way we organize ourselves is slightly wrong. The office politics that feel petty and exhausting. The boss who leads through fear instead of knowledge. The meeting where the loudest voice wins instead of the clearest one. Your discomfort with all of it is not weakness. It is not naivety. It is the oldest, most tested social software ever written, running on hardware that remembers exactly what human organization looked like before someone figured out how to own the grain. The first leaders did not rise because they were the wisest. They did not rise because the group chose them. They rose because they had something the group could not take away. And 10,000 years later, most of our institutions are still built on that same foundation, not wisdom, not knowledge, not generosity, just grain.